Welcome to the Multiverse Fundraiser 2026. I'm Clyde Hall. I'm part of the comic book. and that's George Buehler. We are here on behalf of Comic Books for Kids, and down here we have Mark Weiss. He is part of the Comic Books for Kids. He's the head of Comic Books for Kids, and we're honored to have as our guest today comic book writer David Pepose. David,
hi.
It's great to see you. You cannot imagine. I'm wearing your colors today.
I have that exact same shirt. So birds of a feather. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the support and the kind words. And I'm excited to chat all things comics with you today.
I want to tell you guys. Well, first of all, happy birthday +1, David.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. You're catching me. I just turned 40 yesterday.
Hey.
Yes, big milestone birthday. So that makes me like what 280 in freelancer years.
David, we don't talk birthdays, okay? Can I just?
But no, it was a wonderful day. And I'm just getting used to the new decade now.
I reached out to you about Comic Books for Kids months ago.
Yeah.
And why was I not surprised that you're like, oh yeah, I need to talk to Mark.
Yes.
You've been introduced. So tell us about this.
Yeah. So Mark and I actually met at about a year ago at the Comics Pro Summit at Glendale. And we were chatting about all things Space Ghost. And I owe Mark a care package. I was digging through all of my unopened comps yesterday, actually, organizing them on my birthday. So I will have a care package for you sooner versus later, Mark. Now that finally the books are organized and I know where where they're all at now. But yeah, I feel like, talking with Mark about just, sort of the mission of what he was doing, I thought it was just such a lovely thing to kind of just be able to support kids in the ways that we can. I recognize that as a comic book writer, I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not a rocket scientist. But I think the thing that we're able to contribute that makes the job so worthwhile is that we are able to kind of give people a little bit of joy, a little bit of a respite, giving them sort of a chance to catch their breath. And I think that's what I was so taken when I met Mark, and he was talking about sort of his mission of sort of getting these books into people's hands who needed it, who needed that kind of that moment of joy, that moment of escape. And so I think, having people like him in our business it's such a, we call it a mitzvah, for any fellow Jews out there. And I think it really is a mitzvah. I think it's such a wonderful service that he provides. And so I'm happy to contribute in the smallest possible way, just to be able to kind of help give a spotlight to such a worthy cause.
Clyde, he was very kind. You don't do what I do unless you really love comics. So it turned out that my location at Comics Pro, which is really a industry event predominantly for retailers that are members of this organization, and publishers come in and they present, and vendors come in. Publishers may sponsor artists, as David said, or other artists may come in to showcase what they're presenting so that retailers purchase it. And it turned out that my exhibit table at the event was across from David, and I happened to see Space Ghost. And I turned in from a executive in an organization to a drooling fanboy, literally in the space of about 3 seconds. Wait, you're David? You're like this. You're like the Space Ghost dude, right? I mean, you're with Dynamite. He goes, and then he said, "Oh, do you know about Speed Racer? Whoa, dude, you're doing Speed Racer. You can do Racer X." And all of a sudden, I was 10 years old, and David was such a gentleman and such a class act that we ended up talking comics. And at some point, I literally got up from my exhibit table when it was a little quiet. I just sat down next to David. We just started talking, which was really, really very enjoyable. So thank you for not sharing that. But, David, I think you're incredibly talented. You're a brilliant creator in the industry. I went back and took a look at how much material I have from you. not actually realizing how long, shame on me, you've been involved in the industry.
Yeah.
Just at Mutual Admiration Club, let's just put it that way.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yeah, you know, I often forget that I always feel like I just got started, and then, you know, I realized that, you know, I'm staring down the barrel of 10 years since my
Right.
first book was published, and you know, it's been an amazing decade. You know, I think I have a little bit longer. As I think I have until next May before I hit the 10-year published mark. But you know, I've been sort of in various corners of the industry, boy, for the last 18 years. So yeah, almost half my life at this point. But you know, comics is such you know, it's this really kind of magical synthesis of both just the writing and the art, but also the characters and the iconography and the morality plays and the individual voices of everybody who kind of comes into it, but also the sports team elements of, you know, your favorite teams, your favorite characters, your favorite publishers. And I think that kind of synthesis of so many different hooks is what gets people to be lifers like me. And so, you know, I love comics. I know that we're often maybe an underdog industry, maybe often overlooked, but I feel like there's just something so special and unique about this medium and about this industry that I feel very
Listen,
fortunate.
guys, I'm going to jump off. This is David's moment to shine, and I am not going to get in the way. I just wanted to thank you, David, for being
Oh,
on.
it's my pleasure.
No,
So good seeing you, Mark.
no, I'll be listening. I'm definitely listening, but I'm taking myself out of here to let you just shine and let the world continue to see the great work that you produce.
Thank you so
Mark,
much.
good to see you as always, sir.
Thank you, my friends. Take care.
Take care.
So, speaking of life and these milestones, let's turn the Wayback Machine about 30 years ago, 30-ish.
Yeah.
What was young David on a Saturday morning planning to do, hanging out? Who was he hanging out with? And what would be his ideal breakfast? Include cereal if it's applicable.
Yeah. Boy, you know, it's funny. So if we're saying 30 years ago, 30 years ago was a very interesting time in my life in that I had been an only child for the better part of a decade, and then my parents had triplets. So
Oh wow!
I was about a year into that adjustment period, and so yeah, you know, it was great. I mean, you know, my kid siblings who are now 31, you know, they were just kind of coming into their own, you know, getting to be more mobile. So yeah, you know, on a Saturday morning, boy, that in that vintage, I think it was like the kids WB animation block, you know, that was like Batman the Animated Series. That was I feel like Spider-Man and X-Men, I think I think those had already cycled through. But I feel like there was some others, maybe Men in Black had come out at that point, but somewhere around that kind of block. You know, and for me, you know, my go-to was always just, you know, peanut butter sandwich. You know, it was easy enough for a 10-year-old to make on their own. But yeah, you know, yeah, those Saturday mornings, especially 30 years ago, were chaos because you didn't know which baby was awake at any particular moment, or if it was any combination thereof. But yeah, that was the period of my life where I learned to start counting everything in threes, and I've never really shifted in habits since.
Had you embraced the escapism of comics by then to get away from the triplets?
Yeah, you know, yeah, I'm a third generation comics fan, actually.
Okay.
My grandfather is the one that kind of got us all started on it. And then he passed that down to my mother, who passed that down to me. And so, yeah, comics have always been, I mean, they've been a part of my life even longer than the triplets. You know, my first comic was Amazing Spider-Man 346, I believe it was.
Nice.
You know, David Michelini and Eric Larson. It was Spider-Man and Venom fighting all over the city before they wound up on the island at the next issue. And you know, my mother got me a couple other comics as well. I was initiated Captain America, where it was Cap and Jack Frost fighting against the Ice Worm that Steve Orlando recently brought back in Scarlet Witch. There was an issue of Silver Surfer where it was Adam Warlock versus Drax inside the Soul Gem that Surfer kind of barely factored in. and then an issue of Peter David's Incredible Hulk, where Hulk pours toxic waste on the Abomination's face. That one kind of freaked me out as a kid. But I was probably like 5 when I got all of those. And then they got me Infinity War issue, Infinity War issue 2.
Okay.
All these characters know each other. And that was really kind of like, that changed my whole life. I was like, these are so cool. And so that made me a lifer. I think just knowing that there was this wider universe to explore of all these interesting, cool characters. And I was deep in the habit by then, for sure.
Okay.
Nice.
So I was surprised to learn, looking up some of the information about you, that you entered the field of comics. I review comics for Comics Beat right now, but you started with you were a DC intern.
Yeah.
And then Newsrama came up,
Yeah.
and you were a comic journalist also.
Yeah,
so
for a long time.
that's an unusual. It's not a unique. Other people have done it. It's not unique, but it is not your typical way, right?
Well, it's interesting. There actually is a long history of comics journalists turning pro. I mean, you look back as like Paul Levitz, or you look at Gail Simone or Kelly Thompson. Just to name just a few off the top of my head. And so there, it's not to say that it's unheard of. And what wound up happening was this was advice that was given to me by 2 of my early mentors in the business, Jan Jones, who was my intern coordinator at DC when I was interning there in the summer of 2008. I was working on Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. And then Mike Martz, who wound up, being my editor on many books. And Mike had actually had that history of he had had a time at Wizard Magazine, and and then went pro. So they had told me that kind of one of the ways that a lot of people make their way into the industry is either they're making their own independent comics or they're working in fan journalism. And so that was something that was always kind of a little bit in the back of my head. I had actually worked as a journalist, outside of all that. I was in my college paper. I interned at newsrooms all around the country, even before I was at DC. And so, I interned at DC, and it was like, it was the best job, that I'd ever had. And at the time I thought I wanted to be an editor. And I don't know how many people remember the summer of 2008. Suddenly the recession just just destroys the economy. There are no jobs to be had. But luckily, I had crossed paths with Janelle Aslan, who had joined DC recently as the new Batman assistant editor. And Janelle and I really hit it off. She's a wonderful person. She's working now at American Girl Doll. She was a Newsrama alum. And so she, as I was sort of, figuring out, like, what am I going to do? There's no economy, there's no jobs, but I want to stay in the industry. I spent 3 years knocking on that door over at DC. And so she connected me with one of my biggest mentors in my career, Troy Brownfield, who was the reviews editor at Newsrama. And we still talk multiple times a week. Like, he's one of my best friends. But Troy wound up sort of taking me under his wing as one of his reviewers, and then I wound up kind of taking over the reviews team when Troy retired. So it was a great boot camp. I really kind of learned a lot of language in terms of, like, how to articulate what do I like about certain comics, what don't I like about certain comics, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was kind of building my own toolbox. I something that kind of really was a big light bulb moment for me. There were a couple. One was I took classes at Comics Experience with Andy Schmidt, who's now in charge over at Boom Studios, and a really nice guy. And I took an editing class with him, and I realized very quickly that I'm not built to be an editor. That's like too much organization, all the worst parts of my job and none of the fun parts. And so I realized I wasn't built to be an editor. And then I had a really life-changing conversation with Greg Pak. I did an interview with him at Newsrama about his process. And he said something that really kind of changed the course of my whole life, which he said, when you're learning how to write, you're learning, and that means you're allowed to suck when you start. It's not something, and that changed my whole life. I grew up in Missouri. I did not have any creative role models. I just thought, oh, you either have it or you don't. And that conversation shifted everything for me, where I realized it's a craft, and anybody can learn a craft with enough practice and enough, sort of critical reflection and sort of just learning, how everybody else does it. And that was sort of the big light bulb moment where I was like, oh, maybe I could try writing something. And so it still took a long time for me to get there. I was working in television at the time. I was working in publicity over at CBS. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just work in like development. I'll move to Los Angeles. I'll work as a Hollywood assistant, and then I'll work as a development, still give myself the structure. And thinking, how do I shift from publicity to development? I thought, what better way to do that than to prove I could break a story on my own? And so that wound up turning into the first issue of Spencer and Locke. And I loved writing that script. So I said, oh, let me write the outline for like the whole miniseries, see how that feels.
Yep.
And that became like the smoothest outline I've ever written in my whole career. It's never been since. And I was like, that was fun. Let me see if I can find like a team. And so I found George Santiago Jr. He had just graduated from SCAD. Colin Bell was one of my former writers over at Newsarama, and he'd become a letterer, so he was a shoe-in. And Taylor Esposito, who wound up lettering Space Ghost, he introduced me to the late Jason Smith, who was our colorist. And so they put some pages together. I was like, these look great. I'll shop it around. I'll just send it to publishers, see what happens. It'll be a fun story to tell my kids someday. And Dave Dwanch, who at the time was the submissions editor at Action Lab, saw the PDF hit his inbox and immediately opened it. And about 15 minutes later said, how soon can you get this book done? And that's when I felt like a chill go down my spine, that I dipped my toe in the deep end of the pool enough times that I suddenly kind of fell in and had to sink or swim. And I had moved to Los Angeles right around the time when Spencer and Locke came out. I was working a Hollywood assistant job that I was woefully inequipped for. And suddenly people are liking Spencer and Locke. And I realized then I was like, why am I could cut out the middleman. I could just do this. And so I've been fortunate enough to be gainfully employed ever since.
And you talked about your toolbox.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, it is an impressive toolbox.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I started, I over the last few years, I have read a lot of comics. Over my life, I've read a lot more. But as a reviewer, last few years, I have read stuff. And the first issue of Scout's Honor, I checked to see who the writer was, and there was like a mental check mark of, this guy's really good. The concept, the execution, not every, contrary to popular belief, not every book that we review number one on do we all continue to read the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
That one I did. It was, and then, I was part of the David Pepose Defense Force against my Frank Castlevanian friends who didn't like any kind of Punisher that wasn't Frank Castle with your Joe Garrison character.
Yeah.
And but I said, you tell me somebody else that could take 4 issues and make a completely unique and entertaining, different Punisher that wasn't all steeped in Frank Castle lore.
Yeah.
And make me want to continue reading it. So
thank you. That book was an interesting challenge in a lot of ways, and for a lot of the reasons that you described. It came down to it wasn't even just coming up with a new character, and that was in a lot of consultation with our editor Tom Brevoort, because there were a lot of considerations that people wanted to kind of incorporate into the mix. The fact that anybody who's read a newspaper knows that there have been bad actors who have sort of co-opted that Punisher iconography. And how do we, the conversation that, I talked a lot about is sort of, how do we make this feel like a Punisher book, but sort of put that iconography on a little bit of a higher shelf? Right. So nobody in the real world can walk into a Walmart and walk out thinking they're the Punisher, or nobody can join whatever XYZ real life military branch and think that they're the Punisher. Things like that, or just even, how do we put the iconography on a little bit of a higher shelf so that, all these decals that, people are putting on their, cars, is not the thing anymore. And and doing all that in the 4-issue runway, that was very tricky. I begged for a 5th issue, and just at the time, the 4-issue miniseries was kind of what was in vogue over there. And yeah, it was one of those things. I am really proud of the work that we did on that book. Dave Wachter and Dan Brown, our colorist, did such an amazing job on that book. And it wound up sort of being. There sometimes you can't escape the meteor when it hits, because we sort of got hit by a confluence of two very, very big things. Before even the miniseries, we had finished production on it, and the 1-2 punch was John Bernthal coming back as Frank Castle, which I think that alone kind of would have scuttled any further plans had we even sort of discussed them. But also, our editor Tom Brevoort was tapped to take over X-Men. Right as we were finishing the original miniseries. And so Tom and I had talked very, very loose terms about, what I would love to do if we had done, an ongoing after that miniseries. And actually that approach wound up informing what I did on Space Code. But yeah, it was just one of those things that, sort of those big outside things kind of, sort of made it that what little plans we had kind of shifted, and you actually could see like a little tease on it in that issue of Timeless that came out immediately thereafter. We had a little tease of Joe fighting the War Machine armor that Frank had stolen in Matt Rosenberg's run. But yeah, it was one of those things that just, it was sort of, there was no avoiding it, like Tom had to basically clear his plate from with everything except for Fantastic Four to take over X-Men. And so that's what wound up getting me my cable miniseries after the fact. But I honestly see it. I love the experience. Working with Dave was amazing, and I'm really proud of the book. But I consider it a real blessing in disguise that we wound up not being able to continue that book, because as soon as I finished and I was sort of figuring out, okay, what's the next book? That's when Dynamite reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in a year on Space Ghost? And I've never been offered that sort of guaranteed runway before.
There you go.
That book has been such a joy and a blessing to work on. I'm actually working on the next script on it today. So yeah, it's been, I'm so honored of my time with Joe Garrison and Jake Gallows before him in Punisher 2999 in the Pages of Savage Avengers. But Ben Percy's doing an amazing job on the Punisher series. I just read issue 1 this week, and he's doing amazing work. So I always say everything turned out exactly as it should.
Well, I'm sorry, Clyde.
Go ahead.
I say Joe's still around, in the Marvel universe. So kind of wondering where he's going to go from here. That's it now.
I know Erica Schultz did, had him in her Daredevil miniseries.
With Electra.
I think he's out there, so clearly somebody can do something with him. And I know Ben is a smart, resourceful guy, so I'd be very curious if he's got anything with Joe in mind. That would be really neat. Yes, I have no idea what Ben's got planned. So if Joe makes an appearance, it'll be just as much a surprise for me as it is for anybody else. But he's a fun character with a lot of potential to him. And when we pitched Joe, it was sort of like the Danny Ketch to Frank's Johnny Blaze. So it would be kind of nice to see them saddle up together. And if that day ever comes, I will be the first in line to read it.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing about Joe's story anyway. It's that, it was a whole mistaken identity. Like he's a SHIELD agent in the Black Ops thing. And then because the armor, the way it charges up, it looks kind of like a skull. And so, so I love that whole side of it. And then kind of with Frank's return in the current book, it's like, okay, is this really him? Is he really back? Sort of thing like that. So it's like, you could totally play with that.
Yeah. That was a big theme for that miniseries, was sort of like, to become the Punisher, it's a choice, especially in the year 2024 when that book came out. So yeah, that really became kind of the theme of all of it, is like, what would make somebody kind of do that, and and sort of pitching it as very much this John Wick kind of thing, where, you know, that scene where, you know, everybody keeps saying I'm back, I'm thinking I'm back, and we kind of had a nod to that, where, you know, in issue 4, where Joe's like, everybody's been calling me the Punisher, and I'm starting to think they're right.
Yeah.
And that, you know, like, yeah, that was kind of my favorite part of that whole mini, is just the idea of when, you know, when you meet Frank Castle in Amazing Spider-Man in his first issue, he's already, you know, he's made the decision already. That all happened off panel. So being able to kind of see somebody make that decision in real time, that was very interesting to me. But yeah, also just kind of, you know, figuring out how do you tell this story in a way that still feels like a Punisher book.
Right.
That, you know, it's not you just kind of using the name for no reason. And I think, you know, looking back on that, I mean, I think if I could go back in time and do it all over again, the only thing I might have tried to push was like, could we have colored outside the lines a little bit more? But I think I'm not sure that we necessarily could have. And also, you know, it's just you write to sort of the limits of the skills that you have at that time. And I will say, like, you know, Punisher's a hard character for me. You know, I like my characters to have some. The more stoic characters are much harder for me. You know, because you don't have sort of that emotional interior that you're able to kind of bounce off of. The sense of humor is a lot harder to kind of, like, you know, draw from, and you want to be able to have the dialogue, like, you know, explore something about those characters. And the more stoic and humorless and emotionless they are, it's much harder for me to kind of pull that out of them. So Joe was in general, was probably the hardest character I've ever written, just because of kind of the various constraints that we were working under, but also just he's a hard character to read even when you're writing him. And at the same time, you want to sort of give readers some glimpse as to who he is in terms of, like, the internal narration, because you know, otherwise there's nothing for them to kind of hook onto. And so that was a big challenge for me. But I was very happy with kind of what we put together, and I feel like the writing on that felt like a nice level up for me. And it really kind of incorporated a little bit more of a less is more approach that I think with Space Ghost and Speed Racer, I think I finally kind of, like, really hit the balance that I've been meaning to try to strike.
Well, you know, between the time that the Joe Garrison Punisher came out, and Space Ghost, in our little town here in the Midwest, it went from being the Frank Castlevanians going, who's this guy and why is he writing about the Punisher that's not Frank Castle? I don't know. Oh, Stunchucks, those are cool, but otherwise, no. To, have you checked out the new Space Ghost? That guy's awesome. That writer is awesome. I'm getting all of these books, and just last week I was at a comic book club meeting, and the guy brought me all of his Michael Cho cover of your books.
He's great.
And he, you know, I said, I'm going to get to talk to him. I'm hoping that he's watching today, because, you know, I told him about the show, but we've discussed you at length. And if you were a wrestler, from my limited perspective, you know, Space Ghost put you over you know, with fandom. And I think, George, you had some Space Ghost questions too.
I did. Of course, I work in a shop here in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, Clyde Comics. And Space Ghost is one that I myself have been on board since issue 1, because I love the character and I love the blend you have of the taking it just a little bit more grown up, but it still has the heart of the cartoon, of the original Hanna-Barbera cartoon. I just think it's you hit it on the head. It's just so good.
Thank you.
But we have a lot of dedicated readers because I do live streams on Whatnot frequently. So basically, I'm showing all the new stuff or old stuff, and so Space Ghost, we've got a very dedicated readership for the shop. So,
well, thank you for everyone for reading it. And Space Ghost, you know, it's got to be one of my favorite books of my whole career. I love the characters. I love the ingredients that we've been able to play with in that series. And just that book really was kind of a leap of faith for me, because there were so many things when I was doing my work at Marvel. I was noticing certain things that were popping up and certain trends. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going to file that away. Like, Ryan North, his take on Fantastic Four,
Yep.
which was very much rooted in a lot of done-in-ones in his first year. I was kind of like, okay, like that's something that, like, what if we kind of took that approach a little bit?
Yeah.
That was something that, when my very brief discussions about a Punisher ongoing, that was something I was like, what if we just did every issue as a done-in-one? And come up with just like a whole bunch of new villains and like just different takes and all that. And just, it was definitely also just, I think, like the subject matter, I'll admit, everybody knows my age now. I was not around during Space Ghost's heyday in the 60s.
Mhm.
I wasn't even around during the revival in the 80s. So for me, I grew up as, the coast to coast generation. And
Yay!
I didn't even know that he was a traditional superhero until my internship at DC, where
Yep.
I read a copy of Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's miniseries, and I was like, oh, he was a traditional superhero. Oh, who would have thunk? And when Dynamite approached me about Space Ghost, I talked with a few friends of mine, including Troy Brownfield, and they immediately were like, oh, you should definitely take that book. Like, did you know that Space Ghost literally shares DNA with Batman? That it kind of came out on the heels of Adam West's Batman, and that everybody was trying to get a piece of that pie. And the ones who would license their own stuff, but the ones who couldn't, they would make up their own characters. And so I was like, oh, like Batman's so he's changed so much in tone over the generations. And one of my favorite comics of all time, and it's kind of a Rosetta Stone for the way that I write, is Devin Grayson and Roger Robinson's Batman Gotham Knights. It's such a masterclass in balancing action and character work and emotion and the family drama of it all, and the artwork is just beautiful. And so I was like, oh, like I could write like kind of my take on that, but like a cosmic Batman kind of character. And I started watching the old cartoons, and that's when sort of the lightning bolt hit me. I did not realize what a profound role that Jan and Jace played in all of it. And you meet Jan and Jace before you actually meet Space Ghost in the first episode. And I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That these sidekicks, they really, they're in every episode. It's not like you could read an issue of Batman where Robin's not in it and it still makes sense. I genuinely feel like trying to do anything with Space Ghost without the twins feels like trying to do a banana split without the banana, like or part of what makes it unique. And Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's miniseries it had Jan and Jace a little bit, but they really did not factor in any major way. And so I was like, well, how did these two kids wind up in Space Ghost's orbit and become sidekicks? So there's a little bit of like Kurt Busiek's Astro City in there, particularly the Confessor arc. And I was just like, oh, you could do something really cool about that, where you do this found family stuff that I've really been tapping into since Spencer and Locke and Savage Avengers. Yeah, let's do that. And then we've got this cool, amazing rogues gallery of all these just incredible villains that have their own unique vibe and look and design. And what kind of different genre twists could I inject into these various characters? And so, it really wound up kind of being, the perfect book for me in terms of my sensibilities and the themes that I like to explore. And it was a big roll of the dice, like everything else. I was super thrilled when we were able to get Jonathan Lau on for the book. My editor Joe Rybant and I'd come up with like a 37-page document of sort of like, here's the year, and here's where we could go from the year if you wanted to do past that, and here's all the characters. And so we talked about artists for a little while, and there were a couple of names that were sort of thrown in the mix, but Jonathan was sort of, as soon as Joe mentioned Jonathan, I was like, he's on the table. Yes. Like I was aware of Jonathan's work when he worked on Green Hornet with Kevin Smith. And so I was like, Jonathan, and it was interesting. We had a few people who would sort of, they did like 2 pages of issue 1. And it was the page, you'll actually know it. It was leading into where Space Ghost crashes into the ceiling, and you see him in full for the first time. So we did like, I think the page leading up to that and that page, or maybe it was the page after. Jonathan was the only guy who didn't sort of throw the twins in like tiny little things in the background. Like he understood immediately, this is the twin story just as much as Space Ghost. They're not just accessories. He really kind of gave them the respect and spotlight they deserved. And so I was like, it has to be Jonathan. It has to be Jonathan. Yeah, he's been, such an amazing collaborator on that book. He draws like a damn Terminator. He cranks through. He's the fastest artist I've ever worked with. It is, it's the biggest and most fun challenge on Space Coast is literally just staying ahead of Jonathan, because he's faster than monthly, which means I'm faster than monthly now. But he really like. He understood what this book was from the beginning, and it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. I love those characters so much, and we've got some really fun places that we're taking them. We've got a decent runway on this book, and I've got fingers crossed. I would love to do more. There's a couple of things that we would have to get some approvals on from our amazing team at Warner Brothers. But if they are willing, if they're willing to do it, I'd stay on that book for a good long time.
I was going to say that's one thing I was going to ask you about is that you're doing Space Ghost now. Dynamite's grabbed a lot of other characters. I mean, we've got Thundar, Captain Planet, the Herculoids, Blue Falcon, and Dynamutts. Like Dynamite loves themselves a crossover. It's like.
There are a few that would be I think pretty interesting, there are a couple of names that you've mentioned that would be certainly very interesting. There's a couple of names you haven't mentioned that I think would be really interesting, never say never. I would love to. Space Coast has some great history of cross-pollination, with the Space Stars revival. He teamed up with the Herculoids quite a bit. You won't find a bigger fan of the Teen Force than me. I'm probably the only fan of the Teen Force at this point. Even I know they never had an actual official team up, but the Galaxy Trio is still in that universe. Any and all of those would be really fun, to kind of team up with Space Ghost. So never say never. It would be really neat if it could ever happen. And Lord knows I've been trying to lobby to make that happen. So never say never. Write your congressman. Tell me once it'll happen.
And I mean, you're doing good with Space Ghost because you're in this triple crown of animation adaptation now with Speed Racer over at Mad Cave, right?
Yeah.
And then you got and Captain Planet, also with Dynamite. And I got to tell you that I think that this speaks for your talent when, like you said, you weren't part of the original generation of Space Ghost.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that as a kid watching the show, my mom would go to the store and she'd go, "Oh, do you want this Gold Key Space Ghost comic?" And I would go, "No, I thought you liked Space Ghost." "Oh, I love Space Ghost, but the comic is just like the cartoon." And I was thinking, why don't we ever see them out of their costumes or, learn more of their background? And the villains were, even before Coast to Coast, they were silly to me. I just thought they were just too over the top. They weren't frightening at all. You made them. I waited 58 years for somebody to make the kind of Space Ghost comic that you have done. And now but it's not even your generation. Now, Captain Planet, as I understand, is more your, you watched this as a kid. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's it like to work on, a cartoon that you loved as a kid?
Well, it's funny. Captain Planet, listen, if you were talking to me about like X-Men, like X-Men 92 or then you could say, oh, that's what's it like working on the comic that you love. Or when I worked on Avengers Unlimited, the Avengers are like my favorite superhero team. Like then you can talk to me about that. Captain Planet was interesting in that even as a kid, I saw potential, but I recognized it was flawed. I think it was very much sort of this early edutainment, as they would call it. It was Ted Turner's sort of pet project in terms of environmentalism as a cause that was very important to him, and so he helped spearhead this sort of environmental superhero with this diverse international team. And as a kid, I remember thinking like, oh, this is really this. There are bits about the Planeteers I liked. I liked sort of that diverse friend hangout because that spoke to a lot of my time as an only child. I didn't have siblings, so for a while, and so I had a very close knit group of friends that I would hang out with all the time. But also, like, I recognized even as a kid there were bits that were hokey about all of it. It wasn't until I was an adult that it was about 10 years to the day when we announced it. I talked with one of my best friends and I was like, it'd be neat. Somebody should do a reboot of Captain Planet. You can do kind of like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek version of it, where like, what's the modern version of all this? Because like I said, it's a diverse international team, kind of in the vein of like a Claremont's giant size, or the Claremont era original, post giant size X-Men. You could do the powers are really interesting in a post Avatar: The Last Airbender world. And I was also just like, as I'm older, I'm realizing that the politics were ahead of it. That it was very much like, environmentalism. There's not a lot of people who are purposely being like, I'm going to burn down the environment just for fun. It's not that. It's that it's all about greed and power, and they don't care about, the rainforest has to burn in order for me to get richer, or for me to get more powerful, or for me to marginalize my enemies. That's the price I don't care about. And as we've seen in the last decade plus, like, those people are in charge now. And so I'd been saying for a long time, oh, this is interesting. There's a lot of potential here. You could do something really cool. Yeah. And so I spent years pitching every publisher on Captain Planet. And I remember having one publisher who I genuinely love as a human being, but he made fun of me when I pitched him at a comic shop about Captain Planet. He said, I need that license like I need a hole in the head. And so it became a right place, right time kind of thing, in that Dynamite was picking up more of the Warner Brothers licenses, and they had I had already been working on Space Ghost with them, and it was San Diego, I think 2 years ago, or last year or so. No, it was 2 years ago. They announced that they picked up Captain Planet, and I saw the press release hit my phone, and I saw Nick Barucci and my editor Joe Rybant at the bar, and I marched over and I said, "Is anybody on Captain Planet? Because if not, you need to give me this book." And so, yeah, that wound up being really fun to be able to kind of tell this story that I had been brewing in the back of my mind for a decade. And so, yeah, that was a really fun book to get to work on. And Amon Casalos did such a cool job on that book, particularly with Cap's redesign. Something to kind of just really play up this sort of elemental champion of the wild, sort of this metamorpho by way of Superman kind of vibe. But yeah, that was a really fun book to work on. It was challenging. It was way more challenging than I had expected. I think it's not just it's not just juggling the team. I do love team books, but it's also a matter of the balance of what do you do with Captain Planet, because Captain Planet and the Planeteers do not have their powers at the same time, and so you're kind of having to like figure out when do you deploy Captain Planet, and trying not to do too much without him. That you want to have him be a presence in every issue, but also what are you doing with the Planeteers when he's out and about? So it was a fun book, but definitely one that was much harder than I thought it was going to be when I started. But I'm very proud of how that book came together. I know the trade is due out, I want to say, just came out in the recent Dynamite solicits, so that's either I think that's sometime in May that's coming out.
Yeah, please. Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in. Of course, I have to give you kudos on a few different things because, I wasn't even, back in the day when the cartoon debuted, I wasn't much of a Captain Planet fan. So you made him interesting for me. So I appreciate that. And thank you for making Zorak absolutely terrifying.
Yes.
I mean, because I always thought he was kind of a cool design villain, for the old show, and then of course the Space Ghost Coast to Coast. I mean, he's the snarky keyboard player, get into trouble, but making him terrifying again. Oh well done.
Thank you. That Zorak two-parter, I had a lot of fun with. I mean, I think that's. I wasn't sure, the pacing of doing everything in 1 and 2 issues, how I was going to like that. I had done a 2-part story in Fantastic Four, like a year or so prior, that kind of clued me into like, oh, that structure is really fun. That's really interesting. You don't always have to have a cliffhanger, but then when you do have a cliffhanger, you're sort of, you're really building up to something interesting. But yeah, that Zorak 2-parter was that was the moment where I was like, okay, I think this works. And as I was sort of planning everything out in the outline, and my outlines are very detailed. I write full treatments for every issue, and then I write page-to-page beat sheets before I even start scripting, just because that way I've done all sort of the legwork in the development stage, and then that frees me up to when I start scripting. Then I can kind of explore. I can find and discover interesting things about the character through like when I'm writing the dialogue. And make pivots when I need to. But I was kind of like, like we're doing interesting setup, the first issue is like good at sort of having Space Ghost at a remove, and you're seeing the world through the kid's eyes, and then having that sort of second part with the energy monster where like, okay, like they're finally in the game. And it was, once we got to Zorak, I was like, okay, how do we really kind of show people that like we're going to do something really interesting here with this universe? And so Zorak and Metalis were 2 of my faves, and so being able to sort of really cement them as like 2 of Space Ghost's biggest bads, that was like, giving these sort of personal history there. That was really fun. That was the issue where like I love our first 3 issues. I think we did a good job with them. But issues 4 and 5, I was like, okay, the team has like officially gelled. Like we all kind of now get a sense of what this book is about, and we have a better sense of knowing like what the other one's going to do in any particular moment. Those were really fun. And the Moltar kind of epilogue to all that. That might be my favorite issue of the run. I think we really kind of hit the balance there in terms of the action, but also just like, I want you to feel something for these characters. I want you to feel, an emotional investment. I want you to feel sad for them. And I want you to feel that sort of fist pumping sense of joy when there's that repair in this family. And the whole crew is they're such fun characters to write, and my collaborators in this book are just amazing. I think it's a rare gift to be able to have a dedicated team running as long as we've been running, and I sort of have Jonathan and Andrew and Taylor all kind of just be in lockstep, and I'm writing our 26th issue as we speak. And so, the fact that like we've had the team together unbroken for this long, knock on wood, that I think really speaks to how talented my collaborators are on this. And it really just inspires me to try to kind of bring my A game with every issue.
Well, I got a DC question for you.
Yeah, hit me.
Because I was, like I said, I found you were an intern at DC, but you never have gotten to really, you've worked for Marvel, you worked for all the others, but you haven't got to do anything, a project with DC. And so we have a show called B-List Boosters that we do with every year for the Multiverse Fundraiser about characters that are obscure, that we always thought had more potential, or, that they're just kind of B-list, second tier, and they need a shot. somebody that could take them and show the potential. So I wondered if you had a shot at DC, and you could pick any character, who it would be, or if they said, no, it has to be, full circle on your career. You come back to DC, established writer, you can pick whatever you want, or no, you have to pick one of our B-list characters. Or teams.
Well, there's there's a bunch. I mean, Shazam is sort of my bucket list. I would love to do something with Billy Batson, because he reminds me a lot of Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, I love this idea of this kid kind of learning, growing up. We're watching him grow up, and we're watching him kind of learn what his power means, and sort of how does he wield that responsibly, but also just like, you're a kid and you make mistakes as a kid, and how do you learn from those mistakes, and what do you learn from those mistakes? He's a very interesting character to me. I also love I don't write magic a lot, but I would love to write more magic. I love those kinds of characters. Like Doctor Strange is my bucket list guy over at Marvel. So Shazam's certainly up there. The Flash, I would love to write the Flash. I grew up reading Mark Waid's run, so he's amazing. And of course, even just the Justice League, like, boy, I'd die and go to heaven if I ever wrote the Justice League. I think that is the team. That is the superhero team for me. But as far as some of the B-list characters, there's a few that are really interesting to me. Etrigan is one that I've always been a fan. The very first outline I ever tried to write was an Etrigan pitch. I wrote a very terrible one ahead of my DC internship, because I didn't know if they were going to want interns to do that. But he's interesting because, he's like the Hulk meets the Highlander. I think there's very interesting about that. And also just, he's a guy who, like, I maintain Jason Blood has had a million chances to get rid of Etrigan, and he has not done it. And so I think there's something to that, of like, there's something about addiction, and something about control, and something about, like, kind of, you have the ability to sort of black out, and sort of just let the beast take the wheel. Maybe there's something to that. So he's really interesting. Firestorm's another one that I think is really cool. Let's see. Green Arrow is a really cool one. I guess I don't know if you can really call him B-list necessarily, but
he rides the line.
I think the Teen Titans are sort of they're the ones who I think are the greatest untapped potential at this point. And I know every comics writer has a Legion of Superheroes idea. I have a Legion miniseries idea that I would love to do someday, but who knows? But I think that's like a cool, sort of thing. Batman Beyond, that's another one. I wrote a Batman Beyond script for my comics experience class many years ago, and the fact that Andy Schmidt liked it, that's good enough for me. Terry, one of Bruce's oldest villains, kind of coming out of the woodwork, and wreaking havoc, thinking that Terry is Bruce. There's something interesting. He's a very interesting character. So there's a lot. I mean, I feel like it's never said. I used to say that there's no such thing as a bad character. There's no such thing as an unviable character. My thoughts have changed a little on that in recent years, in that I do think there are some concepts that maybe need a little more baking. But I do think, I think the vast majority of characters, unless they're like totally quarter baked on the way out, like there's something there if there's any sort of longevity. And so, there's so many interesting characters, and DC in particular. I don't know if I've talked about this in any interviews. Maybe this is an exclusive for you guys. When I was teaching myself how to write, I actually it was during the New 52, and there were a lot of things in the New 52 that I didn't necessarily agree with. There were a lot of the books that I didn't love, but also I felt there was a lot of overlap. And so I wrote 52 concepts of just and the rules were no overlap unless it's like Detective and Batman or Action Comics and Superman. So basically, what's 50 concepts of that you could spread across the DC universe? So I would love to do some stuff over there. Like right now, the timing hasn't really worked out, and everybody I knew who was at DC when I interned there, nobody's there anymore. There's been enough turnover. But I would love to do stuff over there, when the timing sort of permits. Right now, my plate is super full, which is a great thing for a freelancer to say. But DC, I love the universe. I love the books. I love the characters. I think Scott Snyder is doing amazing work, kind of like spearheading, All In and the Absolute line. So, the Suicide Squad, that was the one I kept forgetting. I would love to write the Suicide Squad.
There you go.
Suicide Squad. That would be super fun. Write your congressman. Tell him you want to write something over there, and maybe someday it'll happen.
Yeah.
How about Ragman? Because I'm a big Ragman stan. So,
never say never. I'd probably put him in like a Shadow Pact kind of team. That's a deep cut. I don't think anybody else has talked about Shadow Pact today. I mean, I don't know Ragman as well, but I'm sure you could do something really interesting with him.
Yeah, one thing.
Suicide Squad or Legion. They need a legion of superheroes person with your vision in charge. So
I would love it. It'd be super fun.
Yeah, I'll say Ragman's one of the very few Jewish DC superheroes. So and I don't think a lot of writers get into that enough. So there's been some runs who have, and then other runs who just completely ignore.
My mother would love it. Let me tell you, if I wrote it. Tell DC, that'd make my mother very happy.
Well, we're coming down to the end of our time here, David. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you for the work that you do with Comic Books for Kids. This is what we're all here for this weekend. Yeah. And if you've liked our interview, if you've enjoyed hearing about David's success with Space Ghost and the animated comic book that he's brought to the cartoons that he's brought into a real animated spotlight, it's a real. I don't think I've ever seen the circumstance where a person has captured across so many different decades and generations animated characters this well. So congratulations and much success in the future as you continue to do that kind of thing for us.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And for anyone who's watching, you can pre-order Space Ghost. We're in pre-orders for our third trade paperback. Until the stars run cold. But you can also order the first two trade paperbacks at your local comic shop. Final order cutoff for Speed Racer Volume 1 is actually this Monday, March 2nd. So you can tell your local comic shop you want Speed Racer Volume 1. It collects our first 6 issues. And then Captain Planet is also on pre-order. So you can pre-order the 6-issue series trade paperback at your local comic shop.
Yep. Right. And then read Space Ghost monthly or else.
Please. It keeps my puppy fed and kibbled. So,
see, there you go. It feeds his dog.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to everybody in the audience for sticking with us. And now, on to the next part of the Multiverse Fundraiser.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Take care.
The Multiverse Fundraiser is partnering with Comic Books for Kids to raise money for their cause. Their mission is to provide comic books to children in hospitals and cancer centers across the United States, Canada, and the UK. We believe in the importance of providing stories that promote hope and bravery to kids who are facing things that are scarier than any supervillain. And we truly believe in this cause. To donate, you can either go to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Multiverse Fundraiser or directly to comicbooksforkids.org.
The Multiverse Fundraiser would like to thank our sponsors: Earth Dog Studios, Clobbern Comics, The Art of Brian Rodman, Studio Moonfall, Elusive Comics, and of course, the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment Network for hosting this event. Learn how to support these businesses on the MVFR website.